There are always two markets, the aspirational market and there's the excellence market.
That's Mike Roderick. He's a thought leadership coach who helps creatives package their big ideas. And he's here to challenge everything you think you know about marketing yourself. From speaking softly while carrying a big idea to networking being more like a web, Mike shares frameworks that every creator has got to hear.
I'll tell you what, man, like this whole conversation, I've just been feeling convicted.
This, my friends, is Mike Roderick.
Michael, let's imagine you are sitting on an airplane and there is a complete stranger sitting next to you who casually looks over and says, "What do you do for a living?" How do you choose to respond to that?
So I would say I work as a consultant in the world of thought leadership, and I help subject matter experts who are overwhelmed by their expertise figure out what is their big idea so that they can get paid for their brains.
And how come you chose to do that with your life? Out of all the things in the world you could have done, why that?
Yeah. I've always just been really fascinated with ideas and the packaging and positioning of ideas. And I think that there are so many people in the world who have really great ideas and really great concepts and things that they could really get out to a much, much larger audience, but they're just not aware of the packaging and positioning element. I see it a lot where there are people who are, not that adept at whatever it is, but they're really good at marketing. And then you got these people who are really great at what they do, but they've never really kind of thought about the marketing and the packaging and positioning. So helping those people have a voice is really exciting to me. And it's always been something that I've been really interested in.
So you're telling me just being good at something and having great ideas is not enough?
Unfortunately, in our world, no.
And when did you figure that out? When it was the aha moment for you that that was really the issue for really good people who had big hearts who wanted to do amazing things in this world, that they had a packaging problem, and for some reason God gave you a gift to figure out how to help them to do that?
I think it came from I worked in Broadway, and one of the things that you have to do as a Broadway producer is you have to figure out how you're going to take an idea and get it to reach the masses, right? Like that's really what it comes
Yeah.
down to. If there's a show, you've got to figure out how are you going to present this in such a way that more people know about it. And while I was working in theater, I would go to all of these sort of smaller 99 seat and under shows in the city. And there would be these amazing playwrights whose work just hadn't been seen yet. And there'd be these great actors whose work hadn't been seen yet. And I saw and I just noticed, I was like, well, how are other people packaging these things? And I started to think, like, if we were to try to package ourselves like Broadway shows, would we be able to reach more people? And that's really what kind of sent me down this rabbit hole of this kind of work.
Do you remember like you're the framework man, by the way. Like I have never met or talked to someone who has just the most creative ways of framing things, and obviously that's what you do for a living, so it's good to know that you practice what you preach. But I'm curious if you had like kind of your first framework, your first theory, the first thing that you tackled first when you realized that. What was that? Do you remember?
Yeah, it started, interestingly enough, it started as I think it wasn't even a full framework. It was more of a metaphor that I had developed. It was the idea. My very first workshop, I called it Solving for X. Basically, my first workshop that I ever taught was around relationship building. And the way that I had sort of framed it was that every single person that you meet has something that they value more than anything else. and it's your job to solve for X. It's your job to figure out what is that thing that they value so much that you can provide or help with or support with, and in essence solve their problem, in essence develop sort of deeper relationships. That was that was the very first kind of theory that I had that I had developed, was this idea that basically every single person was this complex problem, and there was this unknown in terms of what would be the thing to provide the value to that person.
Interesting. So I know that you really have made a name for yourself in the relationship um, area, helping people build relationships, network, have find folks who are like 3 steps ahead of them and be in the same room. I'm curious, we started this conversation talking about Broadway and how you looked at both of these shows and one was popping and the other one wasn't. And it wasn't necessarily the quality of the show, it was the packaging.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me that kind of the relationship side you leaned into. How does that play into packaging your idea, relationships?
Yeah. So a lot of the time we think about things from the standpoint of access, right? So we're almost always saying like, how do I get in front of somebody? How do I get my foot in the door?
Mm-hmm.
There's always some sort of access problem that people are sort of putting out there. But all access problems are solved by interest. And if we can make somebody interested in what we have, in what we're sharing, then the access often takes care of itself, because the person basically, it's not that you try to get your foot in the door, it's that somebody opens the door for you and invites you into the room. So I think that a lot of the time, especially with networking and relationship building, we're taught the most effective tool is to just kind of get out there and just like meet people and get to know people and develop
Volume.
these relationships. Yeah, but
Yeah.
if we don't take the time first to figure out like, well, who are we and what do we want,
Yeah.
then we're probably not even going to know what we're looking for, and we're likely going to end up in rooms that are actually not very effective for what we're trying to accomplish and what we're trying to do. So I think that a lot of the time, that initial aspect of the packaging, thinking through like, who do I want to connect with? Who do I want to develop relationships with? And what is it that I'm trying to accomplish? Those questions I feel need to be answered before
Yeah.
we do all of this networking, getting out there, relationship building stuff that people talk about.
That's good. That's good. When you talk about packaging, I know you well enough. I've read enough of your material and familiar enough with your work to know that this isn't what you're talking about, but I want to address it first. Like
Sure.
when I think about packaging, a lot of times folks kind of resort to I'm trying to think of a kind term. They want to present themselves, their success, as something it's not, to gain
Yes.
interest and make something look like it's popping more than it's not. And I know that's not what you're talking about when you mean
Yeah.
positioning and packaging. So
Yep.
what do you mean when you say positioning and
Yeah.
packaging?
Yeah. Well, I think, in essence, there are always two markets that that any business, any individual is sort of dealing with. And there's the aspirational market and there's the excellence market. And the aspirational market is constantly looking for a savior. They're looking for somebody to solve everything for them, fix everything for them. They're looking for the quick fix, the magic pill, all of those types of things. And then you have your excellence market, where they're a little more skeptical. They've been around the block. They usually spend more because they're more discerning about what they're looking for.
Hmm.
And they don't really look for a savior or, think that somebody's going to solve sort of everything for them. They look for a guide. They look for information that they don't necessarily have. They try to explore things because they've already made a decision about sort of where they want to go and what they want to do. And the packaging that you're talking about is mainly aspirational packaging. We will always be able to find somebody who wants to, send money to the Nigerian prince who's going to give them the billions of dollars from that email, right? Like,
Right.
we're always going to run into someone who wants to believe that this change or this thing is going to be completely easy. I will not have to do anything. I will not have to work because of that. Because a lot of packaging that is done in this sort of aspirational mass market side of things. A lot of people then sort of get into this place of thinking, well, that's what I've got to do, right? Like, I've got to sell this like wild big promise in order for people to be interested or excited. And the fact of the matter is that's not the case. Like, you can be very honest about sort of where you're at and what you're able to do and what you're not able to do. And I think a lot of people just respect that more. So when I think about packaging and positioning from my side of things, I'm thinking more about it from the lens of, how am I looking at this thing differently? How am I challenging sort of dominant narratives that are out there? Not how am I creating a crazy big promise that's going to make people believe that I'm their savior.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's stick with this metaphor of the Broadway shows. I love that. We have a lot of creatives who listen to the show, and so that there's some kind of like art, some kind of work, whether it's their music, their movie, the event that they're holding, whatever. So let's
Yeah.
just stick with the Broadway metaphor. I think it's beautiful. It's that badass show that had 30 people in there that is so good and you couldn't believe the room wasn't filled. If
Yeah.
you, I know this is a big ass question, tackle it however you
Yeah.
want, but if you were to go to the head honcho dude, the producer, whoever is in charge of, you see how much I know about Broadway shows, whoever's in charge of getting that thing off the ground,
Yeah.
what are some of the first questions that you start asking them? Where would you start with them?
Yeah. So I'd always look at, if the goal is to grow the show, right? Like, they've got it and they want to bring it to Broadway. I'd always start from the standpoint of, what relationships do you currently have? Because if you've already
Okay.
got some relationships with people who are involved in Broadway, then that's really your first step, because you ultimately want the people who are in that decision making capacity to become advocates for the show and help you
Mm,
do something with it. Now, if they have no relationships, then it's a question of, okay, what is different about this show? What is interesting about this show? What are you trying to accomplish with this show that feels bigger than the show
mm,
itself? Because there's a good chance that there are people who, that thing that the show is addressing, and maybe even producers or people who could fund it, they're excited and interested in that particular theme or that particular idea or that particular thing. So you'd probably be able to get more conversations going and sort of make more things happen. And one of the things I used to tell a lot of aspiring Broadway producers, because I'd meet a lot of people, they wanted to get into the industry. And I think actually this applies kind of across the board, is this idea of, you go to the people who are hungry as opposed to going to the people who are full. So if you're
mm,
trying to raise money
mm,
on a Broadway show and you go to the sort of top tier producers in the industry and you ask them to partner, or you say, I want to raise money for you, you might not hear back. It's a bit of a sell. But if you go to somebody who is kind of in the middle and they want to be at that higher level, they're far more open to it, and they're far more interested in collaboration, right? They're far more interested in
mm.
being like, what can we do together, and sort of how can we grow together? So you're much more likely to get a yes from that person to go for coffee or sort of do whatever. And I've met a lot of aspiring performers and people who like they want to get into a particular industry. And the advice that I always give them is, okay, what's your favorite show? And they're like, my favorite show is Breaking Bad. Okay, great. Have you ever sat down and watched the credits? Most people are like, no. It's like, okay, all of those names of people in the credits did something on that show. Most of those people are never reached out to. Everybody's going to reach out to Vince Gilligan, right? But who's going to reach out to the people who are in the writer's room? Who's going to reach out to the people who are, working on the set or any of those types of things? And if that's what you want, like if you want to get to know the people within that world, reach out to somebody on that list because they're going to be excited to hear from somebody, right? Like, it's so powerful. And I just think we don't do that enough. We kind of get into this place of like, and going back to the whole sort of networking, relationship building, there are tons of people who sort of look at networking or relationship building as climbing a ladder. And ultimately it's spinning a web. When you're climbing a ladder, you're thinking about hierarchy. You're thinking about, well, who's the most important person and how do I get here and how do I get there? When you're spinning a web, you're basically like, I'm going to reach out to the people that I'm interested in. I want to be part of the ecosystem of the whole thing, as opposed to the person sort of dominating and trying to get whatever I want.
That's so good. That's so good. I wanted to lean into the differentiation piece because you said to ask yourself what is different about this. And here we go into the thing underneath the thing. You know what I mean? Like the real issue that a lot of us have. I'll use myself as an example. I've always been drawn to creativity and storytelling and so forth in that whole world. And the reason that I've positioned the show and a lot of my content around creatives is, for me, it's been a very spiritual experience. And I left the church several years ago and I was on my way to be in full-time ministry. That was like my life goal. And so when all that got stripped away, I leaned into creativity because for me, that was another level of spiritual practice without the dogma of religion. And I haven't really until recently started talking more about that because that's what's different about my show and my work, because there's a spiritual element to it. And the reason I haven't is because I just don't want to talk to religious people and argue with them about it. I just don't. Like, I'm not in the mood. I want to avoid it. But also it's left a lot of power out of what I'm doing because I haven't really addressed what's different and why. And so I'm sharing that with you because I feel like a lot of us, the thing that makes us different is next to our wound. And sometimes we don't want to lean into that because it's painful. We just got over it. We don't want to talk about it. We're scared of the repercussions of it. Can you address a little bit of that part? Because that's hard.
Sure. Oh, of course. Of course. Yeah. I mean, I love that concept of sort of the gift being next to, the gift being next to the wound, right? Where it's just like you've had this really hard thing and you don't necessarily want to go back to it, but this really hard thing gives you this amazing gift, right? It gives you this ability to go so much deeper, to think about something in a completely different way and sort of approach things in a very, very different way. And I think and I've written about this fairly recently, the piece that I wrote about what if Icarus survived, right? And sort of there's this whole idea, if you know the story of Icarus, flies too close to the sun and then dies, right? Falls because the wings, melt and just dies. But if Icarus had survived, the question then is, would Icarus have ever flown again? Just because, and I think like we going to this idea, we always have to make a choice for ourselves of if we do have that moment where we flew too close to the sun and we lost, right? Like we had something fall apart, something that we had no longer have anymore, do we make the decision to then the rest of the time just always stay safe? Or do we challenge ourselves to fly and just recognize that maybe we shouldn't be that close to the sun? Right?
That's good. That's good. Yeah.
And I think that that aspect of, when you have had a hard experience and you've had some sort of revelation, something that's really kind of you know, made you think differently, you're also, I'm thinking about what you said about how you don't want to attract a bunch of people who are going to argue with you, right? About
Right. Right.
religion and sort of, that side of things. And I think like I've referred to this in the past as the pendulum, and I think this happens a lot with like sales and any sort of selling experience. When like if you've been sold to and you've really been kind of pushed, and somebody like got you to buy something you didn't want to buy, there's a natural tendency to be like, I don't want to be like that person. So what
Right.
happens
Right.
is you sort of like the pendulum swings so far back the opposite way that you become
Mm.
completely ineffective and you don't sell at all,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And I think that when we sort of have this aspect of, well, I don't want to get into a bunch of arguments, with people or have, these things happen, of, okay, well, I have the choice of, do I want to have those conversations with people? I also have the choice of setting boundaries, with folks, and basically saying like, if we are going to have a conversation, um, I just want you to know that these things for me right now are just not non-negotiable. They're off limits. I'm not going to talk about,
Yeah. Yeah.
these things. And I think like that's another piece of all of this where if we have those moments and we have decided like there are certain things we don't want to engage in, we have the right to say to somebody, this is not an area that I want to, that I want to spend time in. And that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to get back to the relationship side of things, because you said that I asked you that Broadway play, the first place you'd start, you said
Yeah.
identifying who could help next in your web, right?
Yeah.
But we need to glance back at the packaging and how things look, because those people are the first thing you're going to look you up on is IG or your website or whatever, or your flyer, whatever it may be. What are some
Yeah.
things like maybe we need to polish up and look at that maybe we miss before we go to somebody, or does that even matter? Is it all about just relationships?
I think it does matter. And it goes back to what I was talking about, at the beginning of this aspect of, rather than just getting out there, like answering those hard questions first, right?
Hmm.
So I think that if you're dealing with the show, or if you're dealing with any sort of entertainment property, just like you would in the entrepreneurial world, I think you really have to stop and have a conversation with yourself about, who is this for? Like,
Hmm.
who is
Hmm.
the audience here? What am I trying to do? Like, what am I trying to accomplish here? Like, what is it that, what is my take here? What is my angle? What is my direction? My way of doing, doing this? Because the people who are in those decision making sort of capacities, they are looking for a point of view, right? They're basically looking at,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
I've got
Yeah.
all these choices. Why this? Right? And
Right.
and
Right.
if we're talking about entertainment too, it's why this. And I think another major question is, why now? What's going on in the
That's good.
world, right? That this makes a lot more sense to do now versus 3 years from now. And
Right.
that's a really important thing that I think a lot of us don't necessarily think about. And there's one of the things that I noticed, I did a little bit of research one time basically like economic depression moments, right? Where like either there was a stock market crash or there were like really hard things going on in the world and like everybody was really suffering. Like it was a really hard time. And one of the things that I noticed was that if you look at film that were coming out at that time, you'll notice that there is a sort of over indexing on fantasy in some capacity.
Interesting.
Yeah. And one of the core sort of reasons behind that is when things are hard in real life, we tend to lean more into escape. And we tend to want to imagine worlds outside of our own because our own is feeling hard. So there are certain times where fantasy just does better, and it really works, versus other times where fantasy doesn't quite work. I think another major thing, I was actually just thinking about this the other day because I think everybody at this point knows about K-pop Demon Hunters, right? And
Lord
how,
Jesus.
right? And
I got an
just,
8-year-old, a 13-year-old.
so right? Like I got a 5-year-old and a 9-year-old, and Junie, of course, is kind of off in her own world, but Diana is just singing the songs and all of the things. But it's like with something like that, there is a marketing component and a positioning component that is so important, which is this idea of high contrast things get our attention. There was a study done once about McDonald's colors are red and yellow. And red and yellow are the two colors that you are more likely to sort of be very attracted to right away and get bored of the fastest because they're so like intense. So there was an actual design element to McDonald's venues of having that red and yellow everywhere so that you actually wouldn't spend a lot of time in the McDonald's restaurant. You would eat and get the heck out of there.
Interesting.
Yeah. Pretty wild when you think about it. And the thing is, high contrast gets our attention. So a natural thing, like we hear the word K-pop and we kind of know what that is and we kind of have some idea of what it is, but we would never expect to hear Demon Hunter after K-pop. Right? Like it just does not like make sense, right, to our brains, like because our brains are so wired to be like, what is logical, right? And that's why we pay attention to things where it's like, oh, that's a logical next step. So I'm going to pay attention to, and this is what I'm going to assume. And this is why comedy works as well as it does. This is why fantasy works as well as it does, because what it does is it causes us, it challenges whatever the assumption is that we're making. So if I'm watching somebody walk down the street, I'm watching a comedy and I'm watching somebody walk down the stairs, I'm expecting them to make it down the stairs. So if they trip and they roll down the stairs, I laugh because it defies the expectation of what I'm expecting, right? So when we create these entertainment properties and we really focus on this idea of high contrast, and I used to talk to people all the time about this with press as well. It's like, if you wanted to pitch a podcast, you want to pitch a newspaper, high contrast statement minus the payoff equals attention, right? If I put two things together and you don't know how those two things go together, want to interview me and you want to ask me how those two things go together. The classic statement, I went from being a high school English teacher to becoming a Broadway producer in under 2 years.
Yeah.
High contrast statement, no payoff, right? Makes the person curious. Same thing. When you look at something like K-pop Demon Hunters, your brain basically goes to how does that work? Like what's going to happen? So you are sort of in that like naturally curious kind of place. So at the very least, you're going to take some time to kind of watch or listen or sort of pay attention, in that, in that regard. And then when the story itself feels compelling to you or interesting to you, you're then going to talk to other people about that story. And I think that another major factor that we forget about in referability and whether or not somebody talks about something is how good does that make the other person look. And yeah, and having little kids, you probably were part of the sort of like the Frozen craziness that happened right when that movie came out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everybody was singing Let It Go, all these videos, all these things. Why? Because it is a show off song. That is what it is. It is a great way to show that you can sing. and then everybody, started talking about it. And that's the thing, is that when you're thinking about something that you create, you always want to ask yourself, if somebody else were to share this with somebody, would it make them look good? Would it make them look interesting?
Yeah.
Would it make them look compelling?
Yeah. Tell me if I'm hitting this right, because when you're sharing this, I'm thinking you started talking about what is your point of view, what is your differentiating factor, what's different, and then you started talking about contrast. So maybe a way into point of view is asking yourself, what is contrasty here about what I'm doing?
Yes, 100%. The way I frame it for folks in the thought leadership space specifically is I always tell my clients, what is the dominant narrative that you're challenging? So what is something that everybody else is saying and has been basically calling the truth that in your lived experience, you do not believe it's the truth? You've seen something alternative sort of to that. And that's what you're sharing with us. Like that's what you're sort of helping us understand. And the metaphor that I use around this is the idea of Wicked, right? And in Wicked, every industry has a wizard. Every industry has somebody who's saying, this is the way of the world. This is how things are supposed to work. And every industry has an Elphaba who basically is like the wizard lies.
I had an email the other day. Someone reached out and was talking about this thing that they wanted to put out into the world, this message, and it is, to use their words, very controversial in their industry. And they said, how do I share that controversial message without being so controversial? And I'm curious. We have the folks that are attracted to my world, my show, are bridge builders, helpers. I attract a lot of very empathetic type folks who that's our gift, and it's also our problem, because our gift is that we're trying to build bridges and we want to bring healing to this world through our work. The problem in that is that we end up watering our messages down so much that no one really hears what we're doing. But it seems counterintuitive at times when you are in these spaces of like bridge building and healing and unity and raising consciousness and so forth, to draw a line in the sand, because a lot of the issues in this world is controversy and division. And so it's like, how do you thoughtfully and tactfully create contrast without adding to the problem?
Yeah, I mean that is a fantastic question. And the way that I like to think about it is that you speak softly and carry a big idea, rather than make this about, this is my point of view and this is how you should think and this is how, like, listen to me and all of these things. You basically just present something and you're like, here is something I noticed. Isn't that interesting? And you can be challenging a dominant narrative, not by saying this person's wrong or this person's silly or this is the worst thing in the world or any of those things. You can challenge a dominant narrative by saying, this is what the truth has been sort of presented by, and here's this other kind of interesting thing that I'm thinking about. And I'm wondering if these two things kind of square up.
That's good. So you're saying that it's not that we have to water down our message, it's just that we pay attention to our delivery and our heart.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And and the contrast element, like the statement, the concept, the framework, the thing that you're sharing can have a lot of that power sort of for you, right? So like you think about the language that you use. Like one of my favorite phrases specifically in the world of relationship building is people hate to feel uh people love to feel useful, they hate to feel used.
Mm.
And
Hmm.
when you think about that, right, it is pretty, like it's got some edge to it. It's got some bite to it, but it's got that bite to it because of the way that the language is positioned, right?
Mm.
I also have said in numerous instances, um, a lot of people will say that the best way to start a conversation is to open with how can I help you? And I actually disagree.
Mm.
And the reason I disagree is I don't know you yet. So I
Mm.
shouldn't be assuming that you need help. I shouldn't be putting you in a place where I'm saying that I've got more to offer than you
That's
have. It could actually kind of feel a little offensive, right? If I open a conversation with how can I help you? And here's the one that really, just like for a lot of people, kind of hits them in the gut. This is for all the givers. This is for all the people who love to help and sort of support everybody else. So whenever you're giving and doing things for others, there is a chemical reaction that happens in the body. Some say it's oxytocin, some say it's dopamine. Regardless of whatever the chemical is, you get a physical rush when you give. There is no chemical associated with asking, except for maybe anxiety, right? So, for a lot of people, asking for what you want or like letting people know what it is that you need is something that ends up just not happening. And I've referred to this in the past as the giver's fix, where the giver is basically giving and giving and giving and sort of seeking that next high of all of this giving and like feeling all of that oxytocin. And as a result, they're never asking for what it is that they need. And they're suffering because they've never asked for what it is that they need. But here's the way that you flip that. By being that person who is always giving and never asking, you're hogging all of that oxytocin. You're actually keeping other people from being able to feel good about giving to you. So it's
wow.
actually more selfish.
Wow. Wow. You literally just called all of us out. I'm telling you what. Damn. 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 Listen, you did not have to say yes to this. I asked for an hour of your time. Thank you. I told you in a DM in a minute, you're one of the most interesting minds I've come across in quite some time. The lunch we had last year, your newsletters, I am a chronic unsubscriber. Unsubscribe, unsubscribe, unsubscribe. I will unsubscribe to everything. And it's no other reason than I really like minimalism and I'm just very, very picky. And you're somebody who I read your newsletters and I'm like, hell yeah, there's something coming.
Yeah.
And it's so thoughtful and interesting. And the storytelling element is so good. I cannot recommend enough that anyone listening to this click over in the show notes and subscribe to Michael's newsletter. It's daily, which is absolutely insane. I can't even imagine what that must take. Is there anything else that you want to direct our listeners to?
No, I think, you go to if you pop by the website, there's all sorts of stuff there. You can sign up for the daily email. I'm on all the social channels. And if you say hello. Always happy to help and be helpful wherever I can.
Beautiful. That will be linked in the show notes. Very last question. What is something in your life right now that you are currently questioning? It can be something really small. It could be something deep AF. But what has been on your mind lately that you have a big question mark around?
Yeah. I think it is this element of this flying too close to the sun sort of concepts. Like I'm really spending a lot of time right now looking at, are there things that I am avoiding or not doing because I've had past experiences where they didn't work out sort of as well. And am I playing it too safe right now in certain areas of my life? Am I choosing not to fly at all, in the fear that I'll fly too close to the sun? That's a lot of what I'm thinking about right now.
I tell you what, man, like this whole conversation, I've just been feeling convicted about a lot of things. Like that is me to a T.
I love it.